Mack Made Movies by Don Brown. In 1900, 20-year-old Mack Sennett was a horse's rear end. It was just a silly role in a foolish skit on a shabby Manhattan stage, but it was his stage debut and Mack dreamed of being a show business star. Had his simple, hardy life made him ache for something different and glamorous? Young Mack had grown up on a Canadian farm. He had hammered rivets and ladled molten metal as an iron worker. Silly or not, a horse's rear end was a step towards his dream. Besides, as the actor playing the front legs explained, the hind legs get to do all the acting and get all the applause. In search of more applause, Mack acted, clowned, sang in quartets and trios. He carried scenery. He tried out for a musical and was asked to show his dancing skills. After a few clumsy steps, the star of the show said, "Please remove this bumbler." Audiences could be mean too. Despite the disappointments, Mack didn't quit. "I was a long, far moose call for my dreams." He learned slapstick, a kick in the pants, slip on a banana peel kind of humor. It was loony, acrobatic, and rough and tumble. Audiences loved it. Mack did too. He performed in lots of big cities like New York, Chicago, and Boston, but the roles were small and success seemed far off. Between jobs, Mack lived on 5-cent lunches and rented rooms in cheap boarding houses with other ragtag show business hopefuls. His worried mother mailed him $20 bills. But a man who was willing to play a horse's rear end doesn't give up easily. Mack decided to try the movies. Movies were a new sensation. In 1892, famous inventor Thomas Edison introduced the kinetoscope. For a nickel, the box-shaped device played a tiny film viewed through a peephole. Early films had no story or acting. The first movies just shows the man sneezing. Early films had no sound, and movies were silent for about 30 more years. Still, movies thrilled people. Movies seemed alive. In 1896, films began being projected onto screens. Movie theaters sprang up across the country. The theaters were called Nickelodeons because admission was a nickel and Odeon is the Greek word for theater. By 1909, 3 million people a day were visiting Nickelodeons. From the Nickelodeons came a cry for movies, movies, movies. All sorts of people rushed into the movie-making business. The Warner Brothers created one of the world's biggest film companies with the money they raised by selling their family's horse. Carl Laemmle stopped selling clothes to start making movies and became the boss of Universal Pictures. On January 17, 1909, Mack landed a job with the Biograph Movie Company and threw himself into the task of learning how to make films. He carried cameras, shifted scenery, acted, wrote, and directed. Movie making proved to be as troublesome as dancing. The cameras were cranked by hand, and if they were cranked too slowly, the actors on the film appeared to jump around like kangaroos. If cranked too fast, the pictures seemed to crawl in slow motion. Early movies were lit with free sunshine and filmed outdoors. Rain and clouds stopped work. Mack learned the movie-making craft. Then he remembered his days on stage and had a tall idea. He thought that slapstick would be as popular with movie audiences as it was with theatergoers. Mack was certain he was right, but his bosses at Biograph were more interested in making romances and dramas. He decided to follow other movie makers to Southern California. The sunshine and clear skies needed for movie making was abundant there. Mack built a studio, which he called Keystone Pictures, near the former lemon and orange groves known as Hollywood. Every morning I went to the studio and got props ready for the day's work. I was telephone operator, bookkeeper, actor, director, and film cutter. It took a lot of physical endurance to get through the work. My hair turned white. He made 140 movies his first year in California. Silly movies of hijinks and hee-haw, goofy, guffawing, golly gee movies where people plunged into vats of plaster, spilled soup down their pants, crashed through collapsing furniture, and slid and slipped, flipped and flopped, crashed, crumpled, careened, collapsed, and somersaulted across the screen. It looked dangerous, but Mack and his performers were careful, and bad injuries were rare. Actors dangled from flagpoles, spilled down stairwells, and ran riot in helter-skelter chases. People chasing people, people chasing cars, people chasing dogs, dogs chasing people, anything as long as it was funny. Eventually, 1,000 workers joined Mack at Keystone. He called the studio a fun factory, but the frantic movie-making shop was more like a madhouse. How could Mack watch over the cameramen, carpenters, writers, props, and makeup people? How could he watch over the slapstick performers who he described as daft as rabbits in the moonlight? He built an office atop a tower in the middle of the movie lot. It had plenty of windows and a giant tub. I could lie back and think. I could bathe and soap and splash and shout any time of the day and keep an eye on my outrageous employees. Mack invented the Keystone Cops, a group of bumbling policemen who seemed to be on a never-ending chase aboard an overloaded police car. Mack loved to film the car in a wild spin and show the cops being thrown from it like water from a shaking dog. He filmed Mabel Normand delivering the first pie in the face to Ben Turpin, launching a bit of comedy nonsense that is still used in TV and movies. Mack hired Charlie Chaplin, a little-known English comic who had no experience performing in movies. Chaplin quickly became an expert and succeeded at making films that were both hilarious and heartbreaking. At Mack Studios, Chaplin created a character known as the Tramp. As a tramp, Chaplin became the greatest film comedian of all time. People said Mack's comedies were unlike anything else seen on screen. Mack's slapstick clowns, the Keystone Cops, Charlie Chaplin, Fatty Arbuckle, Mabel Normand, Ben Turpin, and many others were more famous than presidents, prime ministers, and kings. By 1916, 25 million people a day went to the movies, and Mack's funny, topsy-turvy, slapstick films were a favorite with audiences everywhere. Mack dubbed himself the king of comedy, and nobody disagreed. The horse's rear end had gotten all the applause.